Before a leader speaks, the room holds its breath. It waits to be told what to believe, what to fear, what to value. But sometimes the most powerful voice isn't the one at the podium. It's the truth that sits silently in the crowd, waiting for its moment. What you are about to read is more than a story. It's a collision of worlds, a masterclass in the art of true leadership. It is a reminder that the loudest argument does not always hold the most weight. If you believe that ideas can change the world and that the right words can raise a standard for us all, then take a moment now. Subscribe to join a community dedicated to these conversations. Like this story if you are ready to question what strength really means. And comment below with your definition of leadership before we begin. Your voice matters here. Now, step inside the room. The air in the Atlanta conference hall was thick with the scent of ambition and stale coffee. It was the final day of the Global Value Summit, and the room was packed, a humming ecosystem of flashing cameras and the frantic scratching of journalists' pens. At its center, standing confidently at the podium, was Governor Kristi. She wore her signature blazer-like armor and a defiant smile like a weapon. Proud of the ideological battle lines she had just drawn. She had leaned into the moment, just as she had done in countless interviews back home, with a single, sharp sentence designed to silence the room and frame the narrative. "Sometimes to lead," she declared, her voice crisp and unwavering, "you have to tame beasts." A beat of silence followed, pregnant and heavy. It was broken by a few scattered, hesitant claps from the front rows. She smirked, mistaking the audience's shock for awe. "You've all seen the headlines. Yes, I put down a dog that didn't listen. Yes, I made decisions that some of you found uncomfortable." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the faces before her. "But I'd rather be feared than ignored." A ripple of palpable discomfort moved through the crowd, a subtle, collective shifting in seats. But from her vantage point, illuminated by the stage lights, she saw it as admiration. On the far side of the stage, Ibrahim Traoré sat perfectly still, his hands folded, his expression a mask of unreadable calm. He had been invited as a counter-voice, a token dissenter from a world she clearly felt was lagging behind. She didn't think much of his role. So she added the final sharpened point to her spear, glancing his way with a look that was both a dismissal and a challenge. "If leadership makes you squeamish, maybe you don't belong at the table." That was it, the jab, the gauntlet thrown down. It wasn't just a statement. It was an invitation to a fight she was certain she had already won. The room held its breath once more, but this time it was not for her. All eyes turned to the silent man on the other side of the stage.
That challenge, sharp and arrogant, hung in the air like a blade. The cameras swiveled in unison, a mechanical flock turning from the hunter to the prey. But Ibrahim Traoré did not look like prey. He looked grounded, a man rooted in something deeper than the polished stage beneath his feet. He rose slowly, not with the hesitation of the weak, but with the deliberate gravity of a man who understands the weight of his own movement. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. He walked toward the microphone, his steps unhurried, each one a quiet rebuke to the frantic energy Noam had cultivated. He didn't smile to disarm the crowd, nor did he scowl to intimidate his opponent. He simply was. He reached the podium and stood there, embracing the silence she had left behind, transforming it from an awkward pause into a vessel of anticipation. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers and scribbles, leaned in. The silence became his instrument. Then he spoke. His voice was calm but clear, carrying an accent that was a steady, flowing river against the sharp rocks of her rhetoric. "You say you tame beasts," he began, letting the phrase hang in the air, repeating her own words back to her, stripping them of their pride and leaving them bare for inspection. He paused again, looking not at her, but at the idea she had presented. "But tell me," he continued, his gaze finally finding hers, "do you call that leadership?" No one moved. The question landed not like a punch, but like a seed planted in the mind of every person in the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. He just let the question take root. "You killed because it was easier than understanding," he stated, the words delivered not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. "You silenced because you feared being questioned." He let that sink in before delivering the final, devastating conclusion. "That's not strength. That's insecurity with a badge." Kristi Tame shifted in her place, the subtle movement, a crack in her statue of defiance. Traoré continued, his voice never wavering. "Where I come from, leadership means protecting the weak, not eliminating them. It means lifting voices, not choking them when they bark too loudly." He held her gaze, a man who had seen empires and knew the look of brittle power. Then, with surgical precision, he took her own weapon and turned it against her. "And if that makes you uncomfortable," he said, the quiet authority in his voice silencing any possible reply, "maybe you don't belong at the table." Kristi Tame's jaw tightened, but her lips curled into a smile. It was a forced, tight, brittle thing. The kind of smile one wears when their armor has been pierced and they are trying desperately to pretend they haven't started bleeding yet. She wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. Not by someone who didn't shout back, but who simply held up a mirror.
The brittle smile on Kristi Tame's face vanished, replaced by the sharp, familiar mask of a seasoned debater. She stepped toward the microphone, reclaiming the space with a sudden, aggressive movement. Her strategy was clear: reframe his quiet philosophy as a dangerous naivety. "Ibrahim," she said, her tone laced with the patronizing patience one uses for a child, "we don't live in a fairy tale. We live in the real world." She let the phrase hang, a cudgel she had swung 1,000 times on campaign stages. "And in the real world, leaders make hard choices. That's what separates us from the chaos." Traoré didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, his expression as calm as steel, letting her declaration of reality expose its own hollowness. Then he spoke. "And what you call chaos?" he asked. The question simple yet profound. "Some of us call survival." The tension in the room doubled. It was no longer a debate about a single action, but about the very definition of the world they inhabited. "You speak of hard choices," he continued, his voice maintaining its measured rhythm. "But hard choices are supposed to be for the good of others, not the comfort of the one making them." He turned slightly, addressing the audience now, drawing them into his logic. "You ended a life to prove a point, and then you turned that point into applause." He paused, his eyes finding hers again. "That's not policy, it's performance. And it's not strength, it's fear wearing pride like a costume." A scoff escaped Tame's lips. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to bat away an idea that had struck too close to home. "It was a dangerous dog," she insisted, her voice rising. "I was protecting my family. You wouldn't understand that." Traoré looked at her, unflinching. The condescension in her tone did not land. "On my continent," he said, his voice a low current of history, "we protect our families too, but we don't parade our violence.
We don't brag about control. We teach discipline, not destruction." A murmur rippled through the audience. Something had shifted, irrevocably. She tried to regain control, to pull the debate back onto her terms with a hypothetical question. "Let me ask you this then. What would you do if your people were threatened? If something wild was hurting what you love?" There it was, the word she needed. The word used for centuries to justify conquest and control. Traoré turned fully toward her now. "You call what you don't understand wild," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing every ear closer. "That's the problem. Not everything unfamiliar is a beast, but every unexamined action can become one." The air grew still. Kristi Tame, so often the one throwing the knockout punch, so used to opponents who matched her volume and fury, suddenly found herself reeling from a quiet reply. She was a fighter in a ring with a man who refused to raise his fists, yet was dismantling her stance piece by piece. She still had the podium, the title, the microphone, but she no longer had the room. He did.
Kristi Tame adjusted her blazer, a familiar gesture to reset her posture and her argument. She leaned into the podium, hands resting on its edges, trying to project an unshakable certainty. "You know what I think, Ibrahim," she said, her voice regaining some of its earlier crispness. "I think you mistake kindness for leadership. That sounds nice in speeches, but real power isn't about being liked. It's about being in control." She scanned the crowd, seeking allies. "In South Dakota, we don't wait for problems to grow teeth. We handle them before they bite." There it was again. Violence disguised as decisiveness, fear presented as foresight. But the crowd wasn't nodding along this time. Their eyes were on the other man. Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "No," he said, his voice soft but resonant, cutting through her assertion. "What you mistake for control is just fear behind a louder voice." She tilted her head, a gesture of feigned curiosity. "Excuse me?" he replied, his gaze steady. "You say leadership is being in control, but I lead a country where control was the word used to chain us, starve us, and silence us. We were told it was for our own good, a necessary order imposed by people who looked a lot like you." Kristi stiffened. The accusation was not shouted. It was laid down, a piece of history placed carefully between them on the stage. "You talk about power as if it's a virtue to be flexed, but the most powerful people I have ever met never needed to prove it. They didn't flex it. They carried it." The crowd was dead quiet now. He gestured to the banner behind them. "Defining strength in the 21st century," he read. "Strength is not how loud you bark. It's how well you listen before you act." He looked back at Kristi, his eyes holding no malice, only a profound clarity. "And leadership is when people follow you not out of fear, but because they see themselves in your footsteps." She folded her arms, forcing a smirk. "You sound like a poet," she scoffed, "but poets don't win elections." It was meant to be a final pragmatic dismissal, the ultimate trump card of the politician over the philosopher. But Traoré stepped forward one last time, his presence filling the space between them. "Poets don't win elections," he agreed, his voice even, "but they survive empires." And with that, the applause began. Not the forced, polite clapping from before, but a real rolling wave of appreciation that started in the back and washed over the entire room. It was applause for a truth that had been spoken, for a standard that had been raised. Kristi Tame's composure finally broke. She began to pace, a classic strategy to assert movement and reclaim momentum. But she wasn't reclaiming anything. She was losing ground with every step. Traoré didn't need to move. He was the anchor in the storm she had created. Order without justice is just a cage, and strength without compassion is just another name for fear, she replied quietly to her frantic energy.
Kristi Noam laughed once, a short, brittle sound that echoed the cracking facade of her confidence. "You don't get it, do you?" she snapped, her voice tinged with a desperate frustration. "We don't all have the luxury of talking in metaphors. I govern, I protect. I don't ask the wolves if they feel misunderstood." The audience waited for Traoré's reply, the silence in the room thick with anticipation, like the air before a verdict. Traoré took one slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I've lived among wolves," he said, his voice low and steady. "Some wore uniforms, some wore suits, and every one of them claimed they were protecting something while taking everything." He turned to face the crowd, then back to her. "You speak of making hard calls. So let me ask you, was it hard when you ended that life? Or was it easy because it barked instead of bowed?" Kristi opened her mouth but found no line sharp enough, no retort that could pierce the truth in his question. Traoré continued, his voice resonating with a history far older than any political talking point. "We've been told for centuries that civilization means silencing what's wild. But maybe what you fear isn't the wild, it's the part of yourself that can't be controlled." He paused, letting his words sink deep. "That's why you call us beasts. Not because we're dangerous, but because we refuse to kneel." The room fell still again, the audience hanging on his every word. They weren't just listening, they were learning. And Kristi Noam, so used to commanding rooms, found herself shrinking inside one she no longer owned. She tried to pivot, her voice regaining that governor's cadence, the one designed for crowds, not confrontation. "You talk about kneeling in empires like we're still living in the 1800s, but we've evolved. We build, we protect, we organize. That's civilization. That's what makes us different from chaos." A smattering of polite applause followed, but it lacked conviction. Traoré waited until the last clap faded. Then he stepped closer, his voice low, impossible to ignore. "You think civilization is about concrete and laws? Let me tell you what it's cost us." He raised his hand slowly, counting with his fingers. "Language, land, names, dignity, family, faith. All sacrificed on the altar of your version of order. You say you've evolved, but evolved into what? A world where killing a dog becomes a campaign slogan? Where cruelty is spun as courage?" He turned to the audience. "Where I come from, we don't build by destroying what we fear. We build by understanding it. We lead by walking among the people, not towering over them." He looked back at Kristi. "You didn't tame a beast. You silenced a mirror, because deep down, what you couldn't control frightened you." The room was no longer divided. They were watching her and listening to him. Kristi Noam leaned into the mic, her voice softer now, the sharpness gone. "Let me ask you something, Ibrahim. What would you do if your people were under threat?" Traoré tilted his head. "When my people are under threat, I act. But I never confuse inconvenience with danger. There's a difference between a threat and a discomfort. A barking dog may disturb your peace, but it doesn't endanger your values." Kristi interjected, "You didn't see what I saw." Traoré nodded once. "No, I lived worse. I watched people burn villages and call it liberation. I understand danger, but I also understand the danger of what happens when we use that word to silence." He turned to the audience one last time. "You cannot lead what you fear, and you cannot fear what you take the time to understand." Kristi Noam took a deep breath. She said, "Look, I didn't come here to be the villain. I won't apologize for being strong." Traoré responded gently. "No one's asking you to apologize for being strong. We're asking you to redefine what strength really means. Strength isn't silence after harm. It's the courage to name what harmed us." As the moderator stepped forward, Traoré raised a hand. One last word. he said, turning to the crowd. We don't lead by taming what we fear. We lead by understanding why we feared it to begin with. Leadership isn't about taming. It's about transforming. The room erupted in a powerful, rolling applause. Kristi didn't lose a debate. She lost the illusion. Traoré didn't tame the room. He freed it. This has been a story of contrasting visions, a clash between the old definition of power and a new standard of leadership. If you found this narrative thought-provoking and believe in the power of understanding over control, please take a moment to like this story. Share it with others who are interested in the true meaning of leadership and strength. We encourage you to leave your comments below. What resonated with you most? What does leadership truly mean in your world and beyond? And finally, if you want to be part of more conversations that challenge the status quo and explore the depths of human experience, please subscribe to our channel. Your engagement fuels these stories and helps us build a community that values understanding above all else. Thank you for listening.